For a long time, we've been doing the Visiting Scholar program, and throughout the pandemic, we've been going in between hybrid or online and in person, and so I'm very happy to see people here tonight. First, I'd like to acknowledge all the Honors College leadership here today, and also special thanks to our partners in anthropology and engineering for helping making this visit possible tonight. In a moment, I'll invite my colleague, Dr. Liz Bright, to introduce our speaker. But I also want to put on record that Dr. Bright has been very instrumental in making sure everything works well with this visit. So just allow me 1 second to say something about the Visiting Scholar program. So the VS program that we have here is, I like to think of it as one of the marquee events that we have at the college. And what we try to do is to bring together excellent interdisciplinary mix of scholars that could provide some student-centered events, obviously also interacting with our faculty and staff, but mostly for our students. And throughout this year, our theme has been, for the academic year, we've titled the theme as a post-pandemic world, reflecting and preparing for the future. And we've asked all of our scholars in whatever capacity to respond to that. And this entire academic year, we've had a number of great people from all over the world, and I'm so excited that we have a special guest tonight. So I'll invite my colleague, Dr. Bright, to introduce our guest, and thanks for coming.
Thanks. I'm good. Okay. So thank you all again for coming. Dr. Ann Feuerbach is an anthropology professor at SUNY Nassau. She's an archaeological scientist whose work focuses on the study of material culture to understand how culture influences innovation. She's best known for her research on the archaeology of Central Asian swords along the Silk Road. Dr. Feuerbach received her PhD in archaeometallurgy from the Institute of Archaeology at University College London. Her dissertation, which was entitled Crucible Steel in Central Asia, Production, Use, and Origins, was a foundational study in the origins of Damascus steel technology, in the early Islamic world. And it was based on the extensive workshop remains that she uncovered at the site of Merv in Turkmenistan. Since that time, Dr. Feuerbach has gone on to revise not only what we know about ancient Damascus steel, but more broadly how we think about innovation and change in the pre-modern world, revealing patterns and connections between Europe, Scandinavia, Central Asia, and beyond. We are grateful for her presence here this evening to speak on innovation and post-pandemic possibilities. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ann Feuerbach.
Hello, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here and very, very honored for the invitation. So today, innovation in a post-pandemic world and the possibilities, because so many people concentrate on the negative. I wanted to do something that was a bit more of the positive. That's just the abstract. Okay, you might be thinking, what in the world does an archaeological scientist know about innovation? Well, what is archaeology? Except the study of past innovations. So really, we use it as a database for understanding what happened in the past, so we can use that information to find out and predict what we can do in the future. So really, archaeology is not just about looking at either old cultures, but it's thinking about how did they innovate? What happened at that time that made them create something new? Might be a new object, a new organization, new ways of thinking. Yeah, so archaeology is a study of past innovations, all times, all places, all cultures. We learn about, from the past, things like other pandemics, so it wasn't terribly surprising. And also we know about extinctions that have happened over time, especially when we're looking at it over the long term. other things that we tend to see is, and this we take a note from the biological evolution, that there's a term called gradualism. That's when change happens very slowly over long periods of time. But we also know from, especially even the paleoarchaeological record, what's called punctuated equilibrium. That's when change happens quite quickly. And both of these mechanisms have happened in the past, and that's what we see is happening today. So basically, it's not just creating new, geographical environments, it's also creating the new social and cultural environments. And that's really why I said that archaeological science and innovation really do go together, because we're looking at it for patterns over the long term, so we can, again, predict things for the future. The reason why we can do this is cultures are holistic. Every part of a culture has to fit together, but not perfectly. I think of it as a soccer ball or a ball rolling, because culture is always moving, even though sometimes it doesn't feel like it. And all parts are always moving, but just like a ball, some parts, even though it's moving along, some parts appear to be staying still, but they're never really staying still. And there's always some tension between sort of your different adaptive strategies because of different influences. So basically, one of the things with culture is, of course, museums. Museums are one of the places where we transmit cultural knowledge from our culture and from other cultures. And one of the reasons why the pandemic has been so stressful for so many people is really because it's affecting our transmission of culture and our living our culture. We're no longer, or now thank you, we're getting back to it, but we were not being able to, say, go to cultural events and pass information about, say, music events to people, the theater. We couldn't go out to dinner, passing on traditions with food. Teaching, of course. Teaching being passing down of cultural knowledge. So it wasn't just about the illness and the other hardships that it brought. It was really that it was also affecting our cultural transmission. And I think that's what really created a lot of stress with people, even though it wasn't sort of thought of in this way. In 2019, pre-pandemic, there was about 230 million people visiting museums worldwide. So that, obviously, it's a huge industry, and people getting their cultural fix. They're learning, again, about themselves and others, and the creativity of museums, and the interaction between a person and what it is that you're seeing. And again, objects have things like, a life of their own. They give off sort of energy. And even if it's sort of, well, in physics, yes. But also there's something about being able to actually physically see an object, physically go to a show, go to a concert, which when you're doing something virtually, you miss that. There's something that isn't there. And that's one of the things that we were really sort of feeling and struggling for with the pandemic. Museums were one of the places that was hit hardest by COVID. So I thought this was a great picture for it. That it really sort of, I thought, encapsulated many people's feelings about the whole situation. So again, it was changing the way that we are interacting with people. How are we getting our products? How are we getting our information? How are we even communicating with people? And again, that's what brought some of the difficulties. What happened was, visitor figures by 2020, the top 100 art museums revealed that their attendance dropped by 77% worldwide. They said museums had to close that had been open during world wars, that had been open and never basically shut a day for over 100 years. And now they had to suddenly deal with this. And it was both they said, demoralizing for a lot of the workers there, because you are now, you're out of a job, a lot of them. But also the problem was museums rely on visitors for their revenue. And that was really one of the problems, that it isn't just about the people visiting the museum, but it's also the gift shops, it's also the restaurants in the areas, it's the academics being able to go and go to conferences, being able to go do field work. All of these things are what ended up being stifled during COVID. So, but what happened was, since the museums could not any longer keep going the traditional ways, they had to suddenly find new ways of getting revenue. Otherwise, they were going to fold. So basically, they had to create new experiences, new ways for people to interact with their objects, but not be able to do it physically. It all had to move then virtually. But, said the, apparently John Adams said this, but I couldn't find the original reference, that every problem is just an opportunity in disguise. And that's how I like to look at the pandemic, and look at really any type of hardship, because that's what we see archaeologically, that when something major happens that can be very negative, something ends up blooming afterwards. And often they might take very unexpected routes that you wouldn't have thought of beforehand. Think of it like a river. A river's just flowing along, then there might be an earthquake, then it's now going a different direction. So some parts might suffer, but other parts are now going to flourish. So that was how, basically what we start to see happening here with the museums. They had to start redefining things. Their traditional visitors, they're not coming anymore because they can't. That they had now, though, even though the traditional ones that were coming couldn't, it was opening up new possibilities for new audiences. And that's some of the things I want to show you. Also, it showed new issues with accessibility, because now you're not going there to say, you don't have to worry about, say, the wheelchair access and that, but you now have, what about people being able to see their things online? Not everybody has a computer at home, or at least maybe now they do. But so many people didn't have, say, a cell phone that you'd be able to access the internet. And it really brought issues about accessibility to problems sort of to the forefront with it. But with that, with more people getting the computers, we're able to reach new audiences that way. Especially think about it with a lot of teaching. Even the elementary schools, colleges, that where before the people would have never been able to physically go to the museum, and maybe they would have never thought about visiting a museum online. Now they are. So it was starting to build up a new audience and new ways for them to interact with the artwork, or natural history museums, all sorts of stuff like that, of course, not just art museums. But also, it was changing the way we are experiencing objects, going to the place to physically go there. There was an article that was about how museums are a place that you go almost like a pilgrimage. And this now experience is changing, because now you'd be doing it from your living room, from anywhere. And you could see objects, and from, more so from places around the world. So that's what I want to talk about. The experiences were really changing. So again, museum people are very smart, a lot of ingenuity. So it was trying to find out ways, what are we going to do now? There were some low-tech ways for different methods of engagement. Some places start putting out things like newsletters, emails. I know I get from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, from the Arms and Armor Department, they put out an email about or let's say a newsletter email, about once a month of like a detailed study about an object. So, and they hadn't done that before. starting to get things like podcasts, more videos online. They would show their collections. Now you don't have to worry about people being around there to go, oh, we can only film on Mondays when we have no visitors. Now they had no visitors at all, so they could film whenever they wanted to. They could get in there, go see the objects. But even problems with that, of things when you don't have the visitors, you even have to consider things like, how is that going to affect relative humidity for your objects? When you are if they are used to having so many hundreds of visitors or thousands of visitors, you have to think about things like climate control, humidity, things like that. Now they're gone. So how are you going to adjust it that way as well? Other things too, a number of online Zoom conferences. And I think that's one of the best things, because now you don't necessarily have to go physically to another country to go to a conference. So there's, which of course it's wonderful to go, you really want to go physically, but sometimes, you might be able to only go once or twice a year. Now you can literally go every day to another conference. There's so many of them online. So, and it was more accessible to even other audiences. And of course, videos of their, like I said, of their collection. But this, I think, was one of the most brilliant ideas. Very simple, but very effective. Said the Getty Museum, they challenged people to create a work of art with objects and people in their home. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with this challenge. They said they challenged people to recreate a work of art. Choose your favorite artwork. Find 3 things lying around your house. Recreate the artwork with those items and share with us. It got families together to think about art differently. It had people being more creative, and people that never even thought of looking at artwork were now thinking, ooh, let's go have a look and see what we could do as a family, what people could do as in a school project. And just to sort of show you what people were coming up with, from the Getty Challenge, some people that did some really very good, very much like the originals. But then some people decided to get a bit more creative. I have no idea how they managed to get the dog to sit that way for how long to get the picture taken. Must be a very obedient dog. Some others that are going off in a bit more creative interpretation of the artwork. And that, which I thought was also very creative, and thinking about, I love the tea bag over the eye and the toilet paper rolls, because it does sort of make you think about that. Yeah. So people were being creative. And it also, the thing is that it wasn't just this, but then when people would be seeing these, that now learn about art, even though they never thought about going to a museum. Now they might go, oh, you know what? That's pretty interesting. Let me go now, and I want to explore it even more. Some more expensive types of ways that they were looking at it. Redefining space, because it's not something you think about. If you are in the museum world, you think about space a lot because you want to think about how are people moving through the museum. But now you had to think about how are people moving, but also keeping space between them. So that's another problem that they had to deal with. But even with that, so you have your number of people that can only go through, not having your sort of hordes of people. But even things like this, doing much more with different technology. Said here, this was from Qatar, where they were doing an immersive film gallery. So now you're having a very, very different experience. Just think about that compared to looking at an object or looking at a painting. And more places are doing things like this. And two, that this way you can have people walk through, keeping their distance from each other, but they're all getting this almost an experience like they're the only ones that are there. And they can really sort of feel as though they're in this type of new environment, because that's really what a museum does. It's supposed to give you a little, something that is out of the ordinary. Other ways we had here, the use of things like social media. Yeah, museums had social media presence before, but I mean, really, how many, unless you're really in the field, how many people would go and, look at social media of your museum? But now they were getting much more creative. I said here, it was the Black Country Living Museum. They would have reenactors dress up and reenact something. They would film it and post it. And apparently they went from, from basically nothing to 870,000 followers, right? That's not a small increase. 13 million likes. And, from one of the, was it the TikTok's 100 top UK accounts for 2020. I mean, imagine that. They probably didn't have that many visitors in the entire life of the museum up until that point. And it was getting a new audience. So again, back to that idea of new audience, new accessibility, because different people are going, and a new type of experience. Others, virtual reality, wonderful. I knew beforehand that there used to be I think there still is, that you could like walk through the cave paintings of Lascaux with virtual reality. And so that was one use, but now it's really exploded. You can walk around museums at your own pace, that using, say, virtual reality headsets. Other times, they have a whole bunch of different varieties of it. But here, with in London again, that without even stepping inside their front door, clients will be able to experience an atmospheric subterranean world while an expert guide talks them through the rich history of the capital and its underground. So too, being able to walk around it, being able to experience it in a different way, again, at your own pace, usually, from the comfort of your own home, from anywhere in the world. And now so many more places are doing things like that. Redefining play. So again, using other methods of technology to enhance your relationship with the objects. Here, that the aim of the museum here was, a fun and entertaining, so that you could walk around the room, click on objects, learn more about them, then continue to another room. Well, some museums like the Getty, that with the trying to get more younger people also into looking at and enjoying museums, getting them to think about it on their level, on their terms. So here, it's like that Animal Crossing, I haven't played it, I don't know. But that museums were trying to get involved with that. So this way, again, to get children involved with it. Again, new audience, new experience, new types of accessibility. Augmented reality, too. It's fun. And in different ways. Everything from being able to, do more details of objects, putting yourself somewhere, so it's like you're there, interacting with with things that aren't there, but making it seem like they are. Make it more as though you are part of the experience. So now it's not necessarily the object that's the focus, but you might be the focus. You are part of the story now. So here we have the Museum of Natural History, where it's also, they're not actually touching anything. That's another thing that they were doing. That now working with technology to deal with gestures. So to make here that they're flying along with it. So again, a very different way to interact with objects in museum collections. So too, said the virtual reality there. And here too. So the whole thing is, you are now in control of it. You get to go and walk around, experience it, see it, and look around as though you are really there. Think about that, how much different that is than if it's just flat on a screen. And I'm sure a bunch of you have played with the virtual reality headsets and all, and it is pretty amazing, especially if you're somewhere and then, be able to say, "Ooh, I want to walk over there," and it's like you are moving over there, and being able to, look around as though you are. So you're outside your home. You can go traveling all over the world without leaving your living room and feel more like you're there, but you're not. But too, that also will have other aspects with it, but you're experiencing it very, very differently. And two, you can experience things more similar maybe to the people from that time period, like the caves at Lascaux. Walking around there, looking around, feeling they can do the darkness of it. They don't have to worry about, don't have to worry about tripping over anything. Yeah? Redefining storytelling. So museums, objects, are a lot about it is about storytelling. Now, you could too. You see something in let's say that they used to, museums used to frown upon people taking in, like being on their mobile phones all the time. Now, they want you to be, because they can use it to enhance it. You can learn more about the objects, hit things, and you'd get then maybe stories of people, people that they, like, along with the videos. So you can get much more information from the object if that's what you choose to do. So again, we have new audiences, new accessibility with all this information, as well as the new experiences with the artifacts, or hear these stories. So when they were asking museums, are you going to keep on this route? Are you going to keep with all this technology? Basically, yes. That they were saying, that they thought that all these new technologies are going to help them be much more successful in the future. Said some of them low-tech, don't cost that much money. Other ones, really high-tech. But a couple of other things. When I was, this September, I was in Khiva in Uzbekistan. And one of the things that really stood out to me was, you'd think in Uzbekistan, QR codes. How many people, some of us knew about QR codes beforehand, but now sort of everybody knows about QR codes everywhere. And for museums, very, very important, and very good use of them. The accessibility can be a problem if people don't have, say, phones or technology to use it, but people can rent it. But most people have that these days. But the thing is, too, there's the Khiva, and there are these, they're carved pillars. And they have QR codes to learn more about it. But think about it, too, that with the QR codes, you can have a book's worth, an encyclopedia's worth of information that you can get from that QR code. But you can also translate it into how many different languages very quickly. So right there, cost. You can update the information very quickly as new information is found. You don't have to reprint books. So right there, less waste, and more accessible to more people. Even here, too. This was a site. When I say in the middle of the desert, I mean in the middle of the desert, out in the middle of absolutely nowhere, like borderlining the Aral Sea region, where there really isn't much at all. As you can see, up there in the, you can see in the distance, there isn't anything. But this is an archaeological site. You can see us up there. In the middle of the desert, in the archaeological site, you've got a QR code. Yeah, I can't read the Russian or the Uzbek, but could read the English. You can click on it and learn all about the site. So again, different sort of audiences that you can get, different sort of accessibility, and it really, too, gives you a different experience when you're there. Because, who's going to be taking big textbooks with them to the archaeological site? Oh, this is what was happening here. Here, you could see it right away. They can give you reconstructions that you could see using the QR code. You can get so much more information from it by such a simple little thing. And now now we're all familiar with that. Oh, they were moving up there. So, what did I leave you with this? I said, from Confucius, study the past to divine the future. This is not a new idea. Me saying that archaeology is about innovation, I'm not the only one who thought this way. Confucius did too. So that's That's all I want to say today. So think about how we are now in this post-pandemic world, all these new innovations, all this new way, and how it's not all negative, but it is definitely changing how we went from this world where we could touch things, see things, experience them one way, to now experiencing them in a different way. But don't forget, there's still the physical reality, and that it's nothing like actually being somewhere and touching something. I mean, think about food, virtual food compared to actually eating something. You know, it's a different sort of experience. But with everything that can be negative, you can always find some sort of positive, because that's what we see. That's what we're humans. We innovate. That's what we do to survive. So think about those things. So that's all I want to say. Thank you.
So we can take questions. If you have questions for Dr. Feuerbach, I can come around with the mic. So actually, if you have a question, just put your hand up and I'll come. Yeah.
I was just curious what you think the implications are for like the financial losses that we're seeing during the pandemic for the museums. So implementing the different things you discussed as well.
Yeah, I think some of the problems with the finances is going to be, one, it's a lot of the employees, because they have lost jobs. And that's really, I think, one of the biggest issues with it. But on the other hand, there might be now more openings for the technology jobs in museums. So it might not totally be a overall loss of jobs, but more of a shifting focus of the types of jobs that people in museums will be doing. Said probably much more things like creating the digital books, being able to just go around and, again, one of the things that I know places are doing is things like the, photogrammetry, is it? When they're doing they have the objects and they're taking really good high definition 3D pictures of it all around, so then, you could see, even if you went there to look at the object, you could see it in better and in more detail virtually. So I think it's that sort of technology that is really where like the jobs are going to be, and it costs more money, but you might be able to get more visitors in, or I don't know if there may be more subscriptions and things. So it's a different way with it.
Other questions? Dr. Feuerbach.
So I had a question about how to use this for education, how to use this more broadly for university education, for high school, so this is just scratching the surface of it. And I know they want to monetize it too. I mean, what ideas do you have about democratizing and monetizing and all those things?
Yes, very good question. And I don't think there's really a simple answer to it, but I think it's wonderful for education. But I think that on one hand, you have that with people spending more time on gadgets and not being able to physically touch an object, that's a problem. So I think that it's more of you being able to use the technology and the museum in conjunction with things like maybe bring objects to a classroom, or then they can use that in addition to it to supplement it. And two, I think that it's things like getting the possibly maybe more like subscription ideas of that, like say with the games and things, that people would be able to, for their kids, maybe do that, and maybe have more museum consortiums for it and for education. But I think too that what I find very useful is it's easier for me to do comparison of objects, because now I can go to museums all over the world and actually see the objects, whereas before going to a library that might have a book on it and being able to find a picture of something, and all the good stuff's on the other side of the object that they never photograph. At least for me, that's where all your tool marks are and all the things that aren't necessarily the pretty aspects, but they're the more interesting for, say, technology. So I think that it'll be something that is it's a tool for education, and I think too with it, much more collaboration. I think that we'll get between people from different areas, because it's accessibility. Now we have accessibility to not even just the things that you don't, before we would only see, say, what is on display in a museum. Now we could see all the stuff in storage too. So that's a whole nother aspect of it. So, so I think that said with the monetization of it, it might be more of, again, like TVs with subscriptions. That maybe to that you want to subscribe to all the podcasts, or maybe like the conferences around the world and that. So I think it's, and a lot of them too, I know a few of the conferences I went to, they were taking donations. So I think that people too are more, you can get, do you want to have 10 people giving $50 or 500 people giving, $1 to see something? So, or a few dollars. So I think that it's a wider audience. And to be sort of having to be creative to think about how to get how much they're going to spend and get some money back for it. But also, I was going to say, less wear and tear sometimes on objects as well, because you'd be able to keep them in storage under good conditions, but still have it accessible for people to look at. But there's nothing like actually seeing an object in real life, and nothing better than actually touching it. I know you can't usually touch museum objects, but even a 3D version of an object, that, say, 3D printed version, isn't going to have the same feel to it. They don't have the same texture. So I think that's really with education, it's going to be that, here's the picture, this is what the stuff feels like. This is the weight of it. This is the, is it friable? Is it material? Something like that, so people get another level of experience with it.
So you were talking about the shifting in jobs kind of away from the traditional museum roles into more tech, and how to involve that in the museums themselves, right? But with that comes a lot of job loss for the people who have spent a lot of their time studying it. And I'm really interested what you think of the moral implications that deal with those losses, because it's not a one-to-one. Those people who have been doing these roles forever, they have nothing really else that they can go to.
Yes, that is a real big problem. But I think the thing is too that, what do they say now, that before people would have a job for life, and now I forgot what the number was, but it's something like the average person they think is going to have like 12 different careers in their lifetime, like for like students that are around today. So I think that it is something that it happens anyway, because change happens. So it is a problem, as I think retraining is going to be one. But two, even if they are, say, not in the museum physically doing research, they could still do it elsewise. Because, I mean, with mine, might not be able to go out to the field to actually get the materials, but there's other ways to do it now, especially with databases and with the computer. So a lot of people, traditional museum people, are usually quite adept at, again, research. So now they'll just, rather than actually physically looking at the objects so much, they can do a lot of it, they can get more information online and more detailed. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I think it's just something that it has been sped up, but it was probably going to happen anyway. Yeah, because we see that the museum jobs are few and far between as they are.
Other questions? So, I don't know if, there's one thing is about the jobs, right? But the other thing is about the point of the museum as a place of scholarship and curating, Carrara, taking care of objects, but also researching them. And how archaeologists, they don't just, you can do a lot of things online, but as you say yourself, there's nothing to do, there's nothing like going to the place, working with the collection,
and artists as well, contemporary artists working with museums, very lively, very much in the place. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about some, I like to look at the bright side, but there's also other, there's a balance, right? And of how this has shifted, or if you know how it has shifted, the work of the archaeologists and the people who work in archaeology in the museums as, for their work itself. Because I don't know if it's really such the picture I'm getting right now is scholarship is going to be mostly lost in favor of marketing tools. And so, and I don't really believe that's what's happening. I think there's some more marketing, more Van Gogh experience rather than Van Gogh, but there is still, I think the pandemic and also in other ways has enriched that in-person experience because people still want it, they want it so badly now too, for the scholars, I mean.
Well, I think though the technology is nothing unless you have the scholarship behind it. So it's like you can go and have the, I think actually, I would think it's more of that, yes, you've got the technology and the marketing of that, but unless you actually have the scholars producing the material, the people that do the technology have nothing to offer. So I think it actually will increase it because say you've walked around the museum, looked at certain objects, well, you've done that now. So people want to have the museum produce more material, more scholarly material, so they have more, basically products, knowledge products to offer to others. Because say you've walked around your collection and you've only showed them 100 objects. Now people want more. So then I think that once the technology is set, then we're going to have to do more intellectual creation, I think, of the material, because that's what people are going to want. But like you said, that there's, well, one, we're going to be getting back to, hopefully, to being with objects again. So I don't think it's like that we're going to so totally lose that. But people, think about books, that now, rather than, say, publishing a book, and you're going to keep publishing new material, they'll just be publishing it online and looking at it that way. So I think maybe in the initial stage, we're going to have to get that curve to get the technology, but then it's sort of like, you have a game platform. You put all that investment into the first game, people like it, now they're going to want to see more and more of it. So, and that's when then it'll go back to having the content creators as in the knowledge creators. So and then too, we might know more of what the public is interested in learning about, which is also sort of another aspect of it, which I know isn't always the same as what scholars think is important. But I think it'll be interesting. And again, too, I think there's going to be much more collaboration between scholars from different places because it's so much more. You could see the objects in their collection and then shoot somebody an email and say, could you tell me more about that? So, and maybe even more inter-museum collaborations for more comparison, of objects.
Walking fast.
Exercise. Thanks very much. This has been it's sparking me to think about a lot of things. I work mostly in text. I work with printed materials and manuscript materials. And the digital move there is pre-pandemic, of course, and I mean, I think in your world as well, of course. But I think one of the things we've been grappling with is once you start thinking that things are digitized and that's where you can access them, the assumption is always that if it's not digital, it doesn't exist. And we sometimes drop things off of our focus, and we maybe don't look for materials, especially materials that haven't been that aren't in well-funded institutions that have been able to digitize. So, I guess my question for you is going to be one of thought. If you had $1 million and you could digitize material that has not yet been digitized in the museum world, where would you point your money? Where would you want to excavate? I'm sorry, I used your terms. Where would you want to find material that you would want to bring to the public that may be totally missed at this point? either because it's not pretty or it's belongs to somebody who hasn't been, you know, a culture that hasn't been well thought of or whatever.
I would put personally, I would put all microstructures online. So I could compare that sword to that sword's microstructure, looking at things too, like ceramics, the petrological thin sections, things like that to facilitate comparison for trade and things like that. Things that people, if you look at an object, you don't see. So I think I would put more into the, personally, because that's my thing, the sort of microscopic aspects of it. Tool marks, as you know, with like manuscripts, you get so many little details of things that you can make it for, but even too, you could use programs that do more of the, was it like the visual analysis? So you can go, this is what I think is going to happen in the future. You'll be able to go, I want to see where this symbol pops up in other objects. And you'd be able to scan millions of objects digitally that you would never be able to look at yourself. And then it would be, you know, so you can then get new sort of collections. So I think that it's more of using technology in a different way. That's what I would do. Like I said, that then I can compare, you know, all those ceramics pots look the same. And even just say in different museums. But if I could take, if we have in the, there are published reports, but you would never see them otherwise usually, of these different ceramics. You go, you know what? They all look the same, but they were all made in very different places by different methods. So I think that it would be able to use stuff like that, which would give a whole new level to the studies, you know, and for comparison purposes.
Questions? I'll go here and then that way.
Thank you. That was very interesting. I was just thinking about being able to look at museum objects on your personal devices, and I'm thinking about the role of that in the context of culture, because culture is a shared sort of experience, right? And things in museums are already sort of artifacts of displacement taken from elsewhere, brought into one space. And I think one of the ways in which that continues to be a shared space is people from all over the world can come there and sort of experience it together, right? And I'm thinking of this in the context of one of my students is actually looking at how movie-going has changed in the post-pandemic world. And one of the things he's focusing on is how the feeling of being in a shared space, having your own experience, but in a shared space, is integral to the experience of going to the movies, right? And I'm wondering how that can be thought of about the museum, which is, these are all displaced objects, but being experienced together because of sort of inhabiting this shared space, but now everyone is just, it's like, it feels like even a more privatization of culture, or a individualization of culture, if that makes sense. And I was wondering if you could speak to that.
Yeah, but again, Western cultures being very individualistic cultures anyway, so they tend to have more of a me and that object than, say, other cultures that would be, let's experience that object together. But I think one of the things that is, slightly on that, what he was saying, though since objects are taken out of their original setting, we can virtually put them back there. So it's even just in that respect with it, where was this object originally? We can bring it back to that place to maybe try to experience it with the people who made it. But again, like you said, that I think, the thing is too, is I think that these aren't necessarily all or nothing, because people probably start, it's like people going back to the theater, so back to movies. So I think that it isn't something to think of as we will never be able to do that again. It's more of maybe now we are sharing it with other people. So maybe I'm not here physically with my friends going to the museum, but I might be able to visit it, see it online with 30 people on Zoom. That might, you know, which I know it's a very different experience, but you're still, and we're getting much more used to that. So it might be more that we would still have that feeling of going together, even though we're not physically together. So I think, again, it's different. Yeah. And then maybe we're going to appreciate it when, I think we will, when we can do it together again. But maybe smaller groups in museums, so maybe we can actually be more intimate with objects. So that's a whole other thing as well. So it doesn't, even if the numbers are down, that for physical visiting, it doesn't mean maybe we can have more intimate, better experiences with objects. Rather, you know, because it's a big difference if you have to show that object to 10,000 people walking by it, or if you can get people together in a smaller group to actually, maybe you could take some of the objects out and people could actually see them and people can handle them, not some objects, but, you know, so maybe we're able to, there's a lot of stuff in storage that might not be the perfect piece, but you can then maybe have more things like, yeah, that's a perfect ceramic, but here, let's pass around these pieces that are actually what it's made of. And which you couldn't do that if you have, you know, thousands of people in a day, but maybe if you only have a few hundred, you'd have a much more intimate experience with objects, get a bit closer to it or something.
I think Ashima, did you have
Thank you so much. That was a really interesting talk. So I teach the Visiting Scholars program here in the Honors College. So a lot of the students here, we had a really good discussion on some of these issues. And I think some of the questions that came up, and I wanted to sort of bring forward two related questions that I hope you could sort of, you know, talk to the students about. One is this idea of, you know, circling back to the initial question about where do all of these people that had been employed in museums traditionally go. So that sort of then connects us to, okay, how are we now reimagining education in all of these fields? So for example, museum studies and cultural heritage studies and anthropology and archaeology and all of the expertise that goes into creating a museum space. So now how are we beginning to, or is there a conversation or a, you know, sort of a thought process of how are we going to reimagine that education going forward if we are to think about adapting all of these fields and training new emerging scholars or new museologists or new archaeologists and so on for a space where they can do both. So it's not if this or that, where they can do the digital space and do the physical space, you know, and so they're trained in sort of both of those. So I wanted to kind of connect and see if that's a conversation that's happening in the field. And then building off of that, this idea that a lot of the bigger museums have been able to adapt a lot more easily, so your Gettys and your Smithsonians and so on, where perhaps a lot of the smaller museums just have not had the capacity to even go digital, like we've seen in a lot of the others. So, you know, what are the ways in which we can think about their future, or is that space, you know, something that perhaps is going to be obsolete in the future? If we are thinking of it in this innovative digital space, then are these small sort of museums, are those going to be obsolete in the future? And we want to reimagine museum spaces completely as, you know, as we begin to think about maybe the next pandemic or the next shock. You know, it doesn't need to be a pandemic, even an economic shock can have an impact. So just those kinds of sort of concerns that students had raised, I wanted to get your perspective on.
Yeah, I don't think that I think all the pandemic did was really speed it up of what was happening anyway. So I don't think that there was just that all of these things were pretty much already in the works, slowly happening, and I think it just sped it up, because now too, it's not even museum professionals too, now they have to do so much more with, say, with computers, or if you're designing a exhibition, so much of it is multimedia anyway. So I think that it really just pushed a lot of it quicker, rather than actually changing what was, I think it's like the inevitable, partly. But I think the big thing is going to be, as you said, space. How are we going to use space? How are we going to get, say again, like walking people around museums? Things too, though, it's like the photogrammetry again. They're using stuff like that to see how objects are deteriorating over time. So rather than just with a photograph. So I think that it is something that has been in the works for a very long time, but now, because I mean, computers have totally revolutionized archaeology. Archaeology is so different than in the past, which is probably a bad thing to say, but because it's all now, you're not sitting there with your like theodolites and putting your, it's all lasers. And now using databases for information to analyze your, when you have, instead of sitting there with all your pottery shards and looking at them, you could digitize them and look at them that way, and we're having so much more data. DNA. I mean, that's totally changed things. Having a portable X-ray fluorescence, being able to just go somewhere and figure out what they're made of. Is it fake? Is it where their stuff is getting from? All of this. So a lot of this we've already been doing. So I think it's much more, it's just been sped up. But I think that it's time to really think more creatively. And I think really the problem is going to be, and we see this sort of everywhere, I was going to say almost like the making things more, everything's now like plastic. And so, when even like you can have an object that's 3D printed that looks the same, but they don't feel the same. And if you're an archaeologist, and especially museum people, we know it's all touch. Yeah, it's all touch. And sometimes licking and stuff like that as well. But it's the weight of things. And I think one of the things that people are going to really lose is the tactile. So I think that it's like there's the materials, was it the Materials Museum in London? I think we're going to start seeing more things like that. Or at least I hope we are, where people can actually, you see that sculpture there? This is the stone it's made out of. Touch it, because we don't touch things anymore because so many things are, nylon and plastic, and they have a very, very different experience when you touch them. So I think that it's more of thinking about getting these sorts of skills back. Also craft skills. Maybe museums will be doing more with people actually learning the actions of how do you make that, and getting more hands dirty. So I think that maybe it'll be more play areas. So a museum is a place where people go and you do your pottery. Oh, I like that type of Chinese pottery. Let's learn how to make it. Let's learn about those glazes. Let's learn about the elements that you put in, your reduction atmospheres, your all this. So I think that that might be a really good way to go with it, because it's also family oriented. So much more than people could get together and you have a day out learning something like that. So I think that it's going to be less just look at it, because you can look at it on a screen, and much more that physical, tactile experiences. That I think that's really the way that museums have to go, as well, and some of them do.
Okay, I think. Do you want to one more? Yeah. Okay, great.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks very much for this talk. A number of things that you said in answering questions had me thinking about, like the loss of jobs and what museum jobs and careers are like, which isn't my specialty, but as an archaeologist who spent a lot of time in the back part of the museum doing research in collections, I've never encountered a museum that wasn't having financial problems. And the history of museum funding in the US and elsewhere, it's kind of a sad story of relying on the generosity of wealthy elites. And museums are one of those things where everybody's like, yeah, this is a good idea, let's do it. But not everybody, not a large part of the general public will necessarily think it's something that my tax dollars should be spent on. And it's been a problem for decades, right? The public good of a museum, which perhaps many people in this room would all recognize and agree to, but it can potentially be a really hard sell, especially in times of economic stress. I would think a lot of the museum jobs that were lost due to COVID will come back specifically because they weren't people with museum studies degrees. It takes an army to run a museum. The security, the docents, the people who sell tickets, the people who work in the gift shop, the people who answer phones, the people who work in the cafe. You know, so as crowds come back, some of those kinds of jobs, you know, I would, who knows how many, would also come back if we're still going to think that this place is important. But I was also thinking about, you know, the long-term or, you know, innovation in museums. A lot of museums you go into that have gift shops and cafes today, if they're older museums, they were not built with those as part of the original plan. And when they were first suggested, museums people hated the idea, right? The museum was not a place for that. The museum, and that may reflect some older and hopefully out-of-date sort of elitist ideas, but wherever you see an old museum that has a new gift shop and cafe, it's a patch over leaking funds, essentially. Like, museums did this as a survival strategy.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't something that was part of a lot of older museums, and they realized that, you know, this was a way to make money, especially when in so many museums, the gift shop, you have to walk through it to get out of the building, for crying out loud. Like, how many times have you seen that, right? You know, try doing that with a kid and make it out without having to buy a toy, right? It's tough. So anyway, that was just thinking of, you know, there was this earlier wave of innovation in museums that was largely caused due to financial stress. There just wasn't, you know, again, some museums are fine. It depends on their funding source. But any museum that relies on some sort of government funding that's, you know, state or something, in the 80s and 90s, a lot of these institutions had to think of ways to stay afloat, and gift shops, cafes, renting space out for parties. I mean, this was all part of a shift in trying to just keep the doors open and the lights on, really.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, night at the museum and being able to
Right.
sleepovers.
Based on true events.
You know, yeah, but yes, very much so. And too, though, also out, because it's also very political, as you said, you know, but also we're, I think, changing as a culture our ideas again about things like who owns the past. And why do you have that object? Is it better to return it to another country where now you can see it visually and virtually? Or is it better that you have it because is it an ambassador of that country? Because how many people wouldn't see it because you can't go there? So too, but then it's this idea too of should museums sort of, well, one, there's the thing of giving them back, but I've been in some places, I've been in lots of museums' basements in a lot of countries, and you really don't want your objects going back there. At least places at the larger museums, they keep under, like, you know, good atmospheric conditions, they're conserved, where a lot of other, I don't even talk about the war-torn countries, but a lot of things, they have no money, and if you dig it up, that's basically, you're giving it a death sentence if you send the object back there. I've seen things that are just like, you know, ceramics sitting there in places just falling apart because they don't have the money. So we don't have the money and they don't even have the money. So that's why too, there's going to be, you know, what do you do with objects if you excavate? Where are they going to live? Somebody's got to care for them. You know, objects, they disintegrate. They've been under that environmental conditions which preserve them, and now you take it out of the ground and you have to do something with them just besides studying them, because otherwise they're going to fall apart and they won't be there for the future. So yeah, so there's a lot of other, and like I said, museums have pretty much always had financial issues. And think about, where did a lot of those museum collections come from originally? Private collections. You know, rich people who were able to go out, bring the stuff back, and it was, you know, then it's, oh, I'm going to give it to everybody else, you know, for you could see my collection here. You know, so even our ethics and our morals are changing with those sorts of things. So it's a whole, yeah, another issue with it, and it relies a lot on politics. Yeah. And two, is it better to be in a private collection that's being taken care of, but nobody gets to see it, or in a public collection where, yeah, you could see it maybe, but it's falling apart, or is it in the basement and nobody's ever going to see it? Except for a couple archaeologists who are interested in it. At least this will bring it out more, at least virtually, for people. So I think I said, again, maybe it's going to start closing, so it's like half the museum one day, so smaller than another, say Monday this room's open, Tuesday those rooms. I don't know. But I think one of the things is really going to be getting more hands-on activities. and people learning how, like maybe even just reenactments with people. You know, maybe a lot of people, think about how much people like to go to Renaissance fairs to reenact and dress up. Maybe that's one of, for some things that you go there and you dress up and live like them. Yeah? I mean, just sort of other ideas to get in money. Maybe that's going to be one of the things in the future. Having the food from different places, from different time periods. You know? So people like dress up. So you know, you could dress it up and film it and then put it on YouTube.
All right, I love it. Ancient cosplay, right?
Yes, exactly.
Wonderful.
That's
okay.
it.
I want to thank Dr. Feuerbach for her time once again. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us.